I had thought that building a successful company, making money, being in a position of power, having this achievement and status would make me happy. I had a chip on my shoulder, and it was very driven by a desire for and a need for external validation. It turns out that when my happiness is attached to something that is not within my control and is outside of me, is extrinsic, then it's going to be hard to be, truly happy. One of the biggest lessons for me is I need to attach my happiness to something intrinsic, and that my self-worth should be from within. While money and achievement is wonderful, I also realize now that money and achievement will come and go, and it's temporary. And so to attach my self-worth, my happiness to those things is a losing battle.
Welcome to Founder Meditation. I'm your host, Wei-Ting. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest, Jason Tan, with us. Jason is the founder and executive chairman of Sift, a Y Combinator startup founded in 2011. Sift raised a total of $200 million and is most recently valued at more than $1.5 billion. Jason was the CEO for 11 years before passing on the baton in 2022. Jason and I met at a YC founder event recently. I was surprised to see how spiritual he was. I'm very excited to have Jason coming on board with us today. So Jason, welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you for having me, Wei-Ting.
Yeah, Jason. So before we begin, maybe you can share very quickly about your life story, how you've become who you are today.
Sure. Yeah, I'm an immigrant. So I was born in Taipei, and then I moved to Tokyo and then Singapore. And when I was 12, I immigrated to Seattle, Washington, and lived in Seattle for about 14 years. And then in 2011, after college and a couple of startups, I moved down to San Francisco and then participated in Y Combinator, like you mentioned, to start Sift.
Yeah. You went to Zillow as a start of your career.
Yeah.
How was it like?
I was very lucky that one of my friends in college had interned at Zillow the summer before I joined. And I went through this experience of having my sights set on working at Google or Amazon or Facebook. Those were all the hot companies back then. I saw success for myself as landing a job from one of those companies. Unfortunately, I interviewed terribly. I put too much pressure on myself, and I get very nervous, and I crack in the interview process. And if you don't know, with a software engineering interview, it's a bit unusual in that you have to solve problems in real time, like on a whiteboard. You write code on a whiteboard. That's like often how these software engineering interviews are run. And for me, I just bombed all those interviews. And so I didn't have any other job offers. And then very luckily, my friend had recommended me to his boss at Zillow, and his boss at Zillow reaches out and says, "Hey, we've heard good things about you. Do you want to, come in and interview with us?" And there's something really special about that experience because I didn't know what Zillow was. I didn't understand anything about startups. All I knew at that time was just, oh, go work at a big company, go work at a big company. I just felt this healthy dosing of not caring about what happened with Zillow. It was almost like a, just relaxed energy. And so I crushed my interviews. I did really well in my interviews because I was relaxed. And they made me an offer, and I took it. And it was like the best thing that ever happened because, man, working at a startup, so much of it is luck. It's just like picking the right company to work for. And I got so lucky that the one I happened to work at eventually went on to go public and became very successful.
That must be one of the early experience of having a taste of non-attachment and great things happening.
Oh, I don't think any of the non-attachment stuff happened until 15 years later. I think I've been extremely attached for most of my life. I think only in the last 5-6 years have I kind of woken up to this idea of non-attachment and inner peace and all this other stuff.
And now fast forward to a few years, and then you started your first Y Combinator startup.
Yeah. So Sift.com, we use machine learning to help online businesses fight fraud. We went through Y Combinator in 2011, and the company is still going, a few hundred employees. dozens of millions of dollars a year in revenue. Yeah, it's been a journey. It's been, for the last 13 years, it's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs and everything in between. I can say that I am so proud of what we built, and I'm so grateful for all the gifts that the journey has given me, not just financially, but just in terms of skills and awareness and friendships and experience and wisdom. I really believe that there are very few things in life that can teach us about ourselves the way that entrepreneurship does. Is that everything we do as entrepreneurs, it's a mirror. It's a reflection of who we are, the company culture and the people we hire and the way we approach problems and the way we deal with adversity. It's all a reflection of how we're wired. And so if we want something to change in the company, we need to first look at ourselves and change ourselves. And I think that confrontation, that healthy confrontation of myself is hard work, but it's also very fulfilling work.
From the outside view, Sift has always been this fast-growing rocket ship startup. And I even remember my company, Co-Mentor, used to, actually, we still are Sift customers. When you were used to be called Sift Science, we were using you guys to help us fight fraud on our two-sided marketplace. So I remember being very, very impressed by, wow, this actually works. This is incredible. So from the outside view, you guys seem like this amazing rocket ship, but seems like internally that you actually went through some depression.
I've been struggling with depression for at least 10 years now. And I don't know exactly when it started. The metaphor I use for depression is that it's like a silent, invisible fog that creeps up over time. And one day I wake up and it's like, oh, this is the new normal. And I didn't even know that things had changed. I didn't even know that the fog had set in. I just assumed that it was always there. Yeah, I would say if I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, I would say, hey, first of all, it's okay. What you're going through is totally okay. There's nothing wrong with it. I think I've really judged myself as weak, and I judged myself as broken because I was feeling this way. And I think that only adds fuel to the fire in a toxic way. It only creates more shame and guilt and darkness around me. The second piece I wish I had told myself was, hey, it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, hey, I'm going through this and I could use some help. I think especially in Silicon Valley, this idea of faking it till you make it is both, there's a positive element to that, but then there's also a very toxic element to that for me. And I was faking it until I broke it. And I was faking it until I broke myself. I just think that more vulnerability, more healthy vulnerability for myself would have gone a long way to preventing the depths of my darkness. I don't blame anyone else. This is all self-inflicted, but we don't really talk about it enough in our culture, and it's something I hope to help move the needle on.
Yeah, thank you so much for being so transparent on this, because from the outside view, Sift has been doing very well. And you imagine the founder himself should be quite happy and motivated, because after all, the company is also a reflection of the founder personality and so forth. So I'm just curious about, what was it like? Did you almost have two versions of Jason?
Yeah, I would say I had thought that building a successful company, making money, being in a position of power, having this achievement and status would make me happy. When I started the company, I was 25, and I had a chip on my shoulder that was like, I need to prove to the world that I can do this. And it was very driven by a desire for, and a need really, for external validation. I realize now that I have this toxic part of me that wants to please other people, that wants other people's approval and other people's validation. It turns out that when my happiness is attached to something that is not within my control and is outside of me, is extrinsic, then it's going to be hard to be, truly happy, because it's not within my control. It's something that can change day to day, week to week, month to month. This has been one of the biggest lessons for me, is I need to attach my happiness to something intrinsic, and that my self-worth should be from within. I don't need other people's approval to feel good about myself. I don't need other people's validation to feel good about myself. And that while money and achievement is wonderful, I'm not saying it's wrong. I also realize now that money and achievement will come and go, and it's temporary. And even the winners will lose once in a while, right? Even the most successful people will have bad days once in a while. And so to attach my self-worth, my happiness to those things is a losing battle. And so a lot of my journey has been learning how to rewire what I think success means to me and what I value in life and what happiness means.
The Jason that we're talking with right now is very wise compared to the old Jason, but the old value system that you just described, being attached to people's external validation, is actually very normal in today's Silicon Valley. I'm curious, how's the internal culture like within Sift? The old Jason was also driven by external validations. Did this ever cause any issues? Or is it just like a normal Silicon Valley company that's hard driven and so forth?
One example I will share is that I struggled early on with healthy conflict. I would avoid any kind of conflict, even if it was healthy conflict. And I now realize that was a byproduct of how I grew up, and that avoiding healthy conflict can lead to very negative consequences. And because, as a CEO, as a leader, people follow your example. If I'm avoiding healthy conflict, then that gives other people the permission to do the same. And so as a result, we struggled to engage in healthy conflict as a company culture. I think we've gotten a lot better over the years, but that was definitely a pronounced consequence of my behavior with the company culture. And I think this is why I go back to what I said earlier, like entrepreneurship, leadership is the ultimate mirror. You are the example. People will follow every little thing you do or don't do. And if you want a company culture that engages in healthy conflict and doesn't avoid the hard conversation, the hard, important conversation, you have to show the way. You have to be the example.
Sift grew to become a unicorn company. You also grew as a startup CEO. On the journey, did you work with any CEO, founder, coach as part of your personal development journey?
No, but I wish I did. I really believe that everyone should be working with a coach from day one. And I'm glad to see that coaching is becoming more and more normalized. And I really believe that everyone could use support. And especially at the top, the CEO job is the most lonely job in the world. No one wants to be your friend because you're their boss and you can fire them at any time. And that's just the reality of things. And so I'm very gung-ho that we can continue to normalize coaching and that everyone should get that kind of support.
As the founder CEO, without the coach mostly, you've been through a lot of ups and downs, including the depression that you mentioned. Can you share more about how you navigated through the depression, and it peaked perhaps a few years into running Sift?
Yeah, I would say that upon reflection, I would say that my depression limited my ability to feel emotions. Or maybe it's the other way around, that I numbed myself to emotions, and then as a result, I started feeling depression. I don't really know which order came first. Doesn't really matter. But yeah, I noticed that I just couldn't feel happy. I couldn't feel even sad, honestly. I just was so maxed out and burnt out and so tired every day. And I was waking up and putting on a mask to go to work. I think that the worst of it was like 2017. I just remember on the weekends, I wouldn't even leave my room. I would literally just lie in bed and watch movies all day. And on Mondays, I'd get back up and go into the office and pretend like I'm okay. I'm going to sell the story. I'm going to get people excited about the company. And then, work through the week and be brave and be positive. And then Friday, come back home and not leave my room again over the weekend. And it was a really dark time. I felt like I was living two lives. The life of the CEO that needs to be positive and needs to be strong for their team. And then the life of something within me where I'm just not okay. Like I said, this is all self-inflicted. I isolated myself from the world. I didn't want to see people. I didn't want to hang out with anyone. I didn't want to ask for help, or I didn't choose to ask for help.
It sounds in a way both impressive and sad because from the outside, I'm sure Sift has continued to grow during that time, but it sounds like you were actually very, very depressed at that time. Was there any tell back then for your friends or colleagues to have known that you're actually undergoing through that episode at that moment?
No, because I think I was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. I was acting. And I see this actually with a lot of founders and CEOs I work with. I see the same pattern where we're so resilient and we're so strong. And so we're really good at this ability to suppress the pain, suppress the emotion in service of the mission, in service of growing the business. And it's both a gift and a curse, right? Every strength has its shadow. And so I think it's not about learning how to stop being resilient. It's more about, in addition to our resilience, can I learn how to be vulnerable and truly open about what I'm going through and not feeling as much guilt and shame about my experience, and seeking community and seeking friends and support where I can be myself and just say, yeah, I'm really going through a tough time. I've worked really hard to build that for myself now. I have multiple support groups where I can really be vulnerable. And I wish I had that when I was starting the company, but this is such a lonely journey, and it's one that doesn't have to be as lonely as it is if I had chosen to make it less so.
But what was this light bulb moment that made you realize that helped you become much better and start this upward
Yeah, the
journey?
starting point was actually in 2017. I was at a music festival, EDC, Electric Daisy Carnival. It's a big electronic rave, basically, in Vegas. And I tried LSD and MDMA for the first time. And that experience flipped a switch in my head. And I just remember vividly, like, there was a voice that popped up and it said, Jason, why do you choose to be so unhappy? And that really stuck with me. It's like, oh, am I choosing to be unhappy? Is happiness even a choice? Is it within my agency and control to feel different? And what power do I have to change my circumstances? And maybe I was playing the victim card too much for myself. And I was not tapping into my power to ask for help, to invest in myself and to work on myself so that I can choose to be happy. And so, yeah, I would say that was 7 years ago now. This is 2024 here. But that was the turning point of a very gradual recovery from the worst of my depression.
And then you also had a chance to take ayahuasca a few years later.
Yeah, I did ayahuasca in 2020, and man, I thought company building was hard. I thought entrepreneurship is hard, but ayahuasca is a whole different degree of difficulty for me. I think for me, it's like, it goes back to this idea of confronting myself and really being honest with myself and looking at myself in the mirror, not just physically, but also spiritually and emotionally. And because I'm so good at suppressing and pushing things away, that confrontation is even scarier for me, because there's all this stuff that I know I've been putting off, and now I have to confront it. And so I'm very grateful for the medicine, the ayahuasca medicine. And I also do think that it's important for whoever's listening, what worked for me may not work for you. It's really important that you go find your own path to your healing. And maybe that's doing yoga. Maybe that's doing breath work. Maybe that's hiking in nature. Everyone has their own calling in terms of how to heal themselves. And so it's important that you don't just think, oh, I should go do ayahuasca and it's going to fix my problems. No. Like, this is a very much choose your own adventure.
Can you share a little bit more details about how your first ayahuasca experience was like? Because I've never done ayahuasca myself. I'm sure there's many other founders interested who might feel a bit scared about trying that.
Yeah, my glib answer is that it's okay to be scared. It is very scary. It is the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, by far.
Wow.
But I also mean that in the best way possible, in that I've come to appreciate that everything I want is on the other side of fear. All the magic, all the treasure, like the real treasure of life, is on the other side of fear. And so I need to run towards my fear if I want to be even happier. Even if I want to experience even more peace and joy, I need to not run away, but run towards my fear. And so ayahuasca is like adding rollerblades or, jetpack that blasts you towards your fear. I just remember concretely, I'd been struggling with this idea of, I was really burnt out already. It's been almost 10 years now. I have just no more gas in the tank. I've given so much to the company. I didn't do a good job of taking care of myself on the way. I didn't, treat it like a marathon. I treated everything like a sprint. And so, I was burnt out. And the medicine said to me, Jason, why do you believe that you're only worthy of love if you're the CEO? Like, where's that story coming from? Because it was a story I was holding on to, is that if I am no longer the CEO of Sift, people aren't going to like me. People aren't going to respect me. And that I need to have this job. I need to continue to carry this job so that I can continue to have people like me and love me. So that's my self-worth, being attached to something that is outside of me. And my job changes all the time. We have multiple jobs throughout our lives. And so, again, shifting that self-worth to be more intrinsic versus extrinsic. The ayahuasca medicine, she was very, I say she because in the indigenous culture, ayahuasca is referred to as Pachamama, or like grandmother spirit. The medicine was very, very helpful in revealing to me a thought pattern that no longer served me. If I could let go of this thought pattern, it would lead to deeper happiness and a more true life.
Was this incredible gain just after one single ayahuasca trip?
The joke in some of the circles, the joke that I've heard is that ayahuasca is like 10,000 hours of therapy in one weekend. And I do think there's some truth to that. And that includes the intensity. Like, it is an intense experience. But for someone who's pretty lazy, like myself, I would rather do one weekend than 10,000 hours of therapy. Although I'll also try to do therapy too. I'm not discounting that. But I prefer efficiency, hyper efficiency. And so I'll take that trade-off anytime.
There's a lot of people who've gone through some very interesting or even crazy psychedelic experiences. Is there any crazy psychedelic experiences that you feel comfortable sharing?
I've had a lot of really interesting experiences. I don't think it's helpful to go into the craziness of it because it's just more like drama or story. I will share that for me, the constant reminder of all these experiences continue to converge on a couple of what I consider deep truths for me. Number one is that love is the only thing that matters in life. To love others and to be loved. And I mean that in the most unconditional sense of what love is. To like truly love from a place of, I don't need anything from you. I'm going to love you as you are. You don't need to change. And it's kind of the way we would love our children. We don't need them to be a certain way. We just love them. So the medicine and all these journeys continue to remind me of what is getting in the way of me loving myself more and what is getting in the way of me loving others more. And how do I continue to remove those barriers from my ability to love even more deeply and unconditionally? What are the conditions upon which I've placed on my love? The other deep truth that I've come to appreciate is we are all connected. We're all one. And this idea of me versus you, us versus them, the separation is an illusion. And we are all part of the same ocean. It's really sometimes difficult to remember that. And that's why we lead to war. We forget that we're all on the same team, which is Team Human. Doesn't matter what country you live in, what religion you practice, what your ethnicity is. We're all one human race, one species. I'm reminded to try to be less quick to judge others that disagree with me or that are very different from me. And to remember that they're my brother and then my sister too. And so am I to them. And like compassion, really deep compassion. Everyone's fighting a battle that you know nothing about. And this idea that what we see on the surface is not all that there is to us. And so to be less quick to jump to conclusions when I talk to people and to try to understand better before I respond, before I judge, before I attack. And I would also say like deep gratitude. That's probably been one of the best gifts I've gotten from these journeys, is just like, wow, what a gift it is to be alive, just to even breathe air. I took so much for granted. I realized I had this sense of entitlement as to how my life is supposed to go and what I deserve. To build a company is one of the most insane privileges that we get to have. It's like the icing on the cake. And for me to remember that, just to be able to wake up every day and have full use of my body, what a gift. This is a quote: no matter what you're going through, there is someone in a hospital bed who would do anything to trade places with you. And then I would add a second part to that quote. This is my own addition. If you are in a hospital, there is someone in a grave somewhere who would trade places with you. My dad just passed away in May, and people die. We lose people all the time. And so to be just even alive is the most important gift of all.
Jason, thank you so much for sharing. Those are very, very beautiful insights. And many of the notions that you touched upon, for example, the notion of interconnectedness, many of those topics are commonly talked about in the spiritual circle. And for most people, they are merely a conceptual knowledge that people like to throw about. But in order for you to fully grasp that, you must have gone through some direct experiences to really believing in those insights and internalize those for you.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, that there's the theory of all this work and then there's the actual practice of it. And it's important to not get lost in the theory, because the theory is still just abstract. It's important about how you live it and embody it and make it yours, really, right? The theory is just a map. A map is not its terrain. And so you have to go walk the terrain to really understand the terrain itself. I do think that is one of the major benefits of something like ayahuasca, is that it is a 110% experiential. For better or worse, how I describe ayahuasca to others is that it shuts down my brain. And that's very scary for my brain, because my brain loves being in control. My brain wants to always be on. And my brain is paranoid of having someone else in the driver's seat, of trusting and surrendering. But the beautiful thing about ayahuasca is that she shuts down my brain so that I can just fully be in my body and experience. Once I've experienced something, it's just like it has a deeper level of truth than anything else I could read in a book. And I'll give an example, like when you love your partner, when you love your children, when you love your parents, when you love your siblings, you cannot explain that to someone else. There's no words that would ever describe that adequately. And it's the experience of love that we are experiencing. And so how do we continue to make room for experiential learning versus just theoretical learning? I think this is one of the challenges with a lot of the Western education system, is that it is very intellectual. It is very based on the observable evidence of the universe. I'm not saying that we should diminish that or deprioritize it. I'm just saying a more balanced education system would add to the mix room for experiential learning.
So for founders who are really interested in trying ayahuasca or any other psychedelics, what's your advice for them?
Yeah, I would make sure that you are in tune with what is it that you're trying to get out of the experience. I would say there's kind of this spectrum of exploration or escape. And it gets dark when you're escaping. I don't think that it's healthy to, just like one may drown their sorrows in alcohol, one could drown their sorrows in psychedelics. I've seen it happen, and it's not healthy. And so if you're feeling called to explore and not escape, then psychedelics could be worth trying. And for me as a founder, actually, I would say generally one of the stereotypes I definitely believe is true is that most founders were control freaks. And that's part of why we're so successful at what we do, is that we care about every little detail. We want everything to go right. We have really high standards. That has both a strength and a shadow. And so for me, ayahuasca And psychedelics often test my controlling nature in a very healthy way. And I have come to learn how to be less controlling thanks to these experiences. And as a result of being less controlling, I just experience a lot more peace and joy. And at the same time, I think I'm more successful because I'm not trying to focus on all the details all the time. I realize that any given week, any given month, there's just a few things that really matter. And those are the things I should be really focused on and trying to control, not all the things all the time. When I was much more controlling, I was just constantly stressed out. And I was wasting a lot of my time worrying about stuff that doesn't really move the needle. And so I do think it's about finding that right balance for myself.
Is there any trusted providers of ayahuasca experiences that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, the one that I did it with, my first experience was called One Heart. You can look them up, One Heart Journeys. But yeah, there's a lot of wonderful providers. I recommend one of the most important things for a first-time ayahuasca experience is really making time to integrate. I see sometimes the mistake of people go back to work like 5 days later. And I'm just like, man, it's doing yourself a disservice because the work will always be there. And the work is very good at triggering all of our old patterns and our old habits and getting into that old rhythm. And so if you're serious about wanting real lasting change, just give yourself some grace and give yourself some real space before you jump back into work so that you can reflect, like really reflect on the experience and what it's trying to teach you. And then you can be much more intentional and committed with how you take that newfound wisdom and insight and integrate it into your everyday. Because it's going to be probably, for at least for me, it was, like I said, the most difficult thing I've ever done, the most intense thing I've ever done. And with that intensity came some really lasting change. And I'm really glad that, especially for my first time, I did it in the middle of my sabbatical. I had a 4-week sabbatical. And the first week I did ayahuasca, and so I had 3 weeks to integrate. And when I came back from the sabbatical, my executive team, every single person said to me, Jason, you're different. Like, you just seem happier and calmer and you're less stressed. And what happened? It was like that level of change. But I'm pretty sure that if I had gone back to work 3 to 4 or 5 days after the experience, I would not have had that as much of a change.
So instead of taking a 1-day trip or even a weekend getaway, you're recommending people to do a 5-day or even longer?
Well, I'm less prescriptive on the sitting with the medicine itself. Typically, you do 2 to 3 journeys. Each night you drink the medicine. So 2 to 3 nights is a typical experience. I'm saying that after that experience is wrapped up, don't go back to work for at least 1 week. That's like my minimum threshold. Just go for a week, go to the woods and bring a journal and just spend some time with yourself and really think about things. I mean, all of this is, to use a more commonly accepted phrase, all of this is a practice in mindfulness, right? Are we even aware of how we're showing up in the world? Are we even aware of what subconscious loops are driving our behavior? And that work is, in my opinion, really some of the most important work we ever do in our lives. But that work also requires the right space and environment so that we can examine ourselves with love and grace. And after we examine ourselves, we can ask if we want to make different choices. That to me is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most rewarding and it's the most impactful work we can do. And it is not just good for our personal lives, it's very good for business, because as a leader, we aspire to be calm. As a leader, we aspire to be graceful. As a leader, we aspire to be decisive. All the best qualities of leadership require us to cultivate our own self-mastery.
Jason, for those who don't quite know how ayahuasca works, because you keep saying it was a scary experience, can you share a bit more about why is it scary? Does it bring out psychological trauma deep down? Where does the scary part come from?
Yeah. Look, I think it's really important that for the listener, every experience is different. So all I can do is share from my experience. And then I've also heard enough from other people who have done ayahuasca that they would describe it as one of the more difficult things they've ever done, or also scary things they've ever done. For me, it's scary on multiple levels. I think first is going back to what I said about learning how to release my need for control. Ayahuasca is stripping away that desire for control. And again, I actually think that's very healthy, because the only way a control freak like me learns how to control less is to learn how to control less. And I need to have that control removed and to then breathe into that new space and be like, oh, it's actually okay for me to not need to control that. Why was I so intensely focused on trying to control that thing? It actually turns out it's totally okay to not control that. So that's one reason why it's scary, is that I am rewiring my strong need for control. And ayahuasca is like, we're just going to rip that out of your hands, and you're going to learn that it's actually totally okay to not have control. But it's almost like a baby being tossed into the water for the first time. Like, holy shit, what's going on? Oh, and then breathe, swim. Okay, you're learning how to swim for the first time. And I think second is what you said about trauma. It's just like unhealed wounds. Stuff that happened when I was younger that I repressed, that I didn't give myself the space or didn't know how to heal from. And so ayahuasca is medicine. That is how the indigenous culture refers to it. It treats it. They don't treat it as a drug. They don't think of it as a psychedelic. They think of it as medicine. It's like nature's medicine. It's trying to help us heal. And as we know, oftentimes medicine can suck. Medicine can be painful, right? The sting of putting some hydrogen peroxide on an open wound. And yet we know that long term, this is very good for us. So whatever needs to be healed, ayahuasca has this intelligence about it. She knows this is what you're working on, or this is what you need to work on. Let me help you. And the more I try to resist that help, the more difficult the experience becomes. But if I allow her to do her magic and then work with me and dance with her, a lot of this trauma that I was holding on to, it becomes a thing of the past. It's no longer interrupting my conscious day-to-day. And so, yeah, it's very painful, but it's long-term very good.
That sounds incredible insight. Since there are many tech founders based in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm sure there are some of us who have had experience of microdosing before. It sounds like this is completely different from microdosing.
Yeah, no, this is macro dosing. You don't even take like a big dose though. It's like I said, 10,000 hours of therapy in one night. That's the best way I can put it.
I'm sure there are other founders out there who've had psychedelic experiences. So I remember I also talked to one YC founder who said that he had this DMT experience and saw himself as this ball of energy. But the issue is that he couldn't really integrate. That was an interesting experience. That was an interesting journey. But he didn't know how he could meaningfully integrate that kind of experiences in his own life or grow as a person, as an individual in real life in any meaningful ways. What's your take or advice on this?
Yeah, I would say that the messages and experiences that we often get from these medicines are not necessarily a new message. For me, it's like remembering more deeply. Like my body already knows and remembers everything, but I'm trying to now connect that to my brain and to my heart, and to have all of these three pieces remember everything together in harmony. That ball of light is a very interesting example because I too have had something similar. And the way I've interpreted it is remembering that our true nature is love. Our true nature is light and consciousness. And we just forget that. We put mud on ourselves and it masks the light that we really are. And you know this to be true because when you observe children, young children and babies, there's no hate in their heart. Babies are pure. They're born pure light and love. And so somehow from that point into our adulthood, we forget that light. And so I try to use these experiences to re-anchor myself on what I aspire to be and how I want to show up. And can I be kinder to myself and others? Can I be more compassionate to myself and others? Can I be more graceful to myself and others? Because this is my true nature. And I would say, even one level deeper, it's this quote that I love We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And for me, what that means is that when I wake up, I try not to be attached to me as Jason. I get to be Jason today, and you get to be Wei Ting, but that's not all there is. Like when I die and when you die, it's not game over. We're part of that ocean of infinite consciousness. And that infinite consciousness is a different thing every day. It's a different life every lifetime.
That's very beautiful. People like to talk about mental health all the time. And you mentioned that you like to make a distinction between mental health versus spiritual health. Can you briefly comment on that?
I used to think that I struggled with mental health. I definitely did. But what I realized was the more important, for me at least, the more important work was that I had lost faith and I lost hope. And faith and hope are not things that come from here. Faith and hope are things that come from here, right? It's like your soul is like rising and believes, despite all the obstacles, despite the odds, despite all the terrible stuff that happens, we'll find a way through. It's going to be okay, right? And so I cannot think my way into hope. I cannot think my way into faith. I need to feel faith. I need to feel hope, right? And so that lives in my heart. And that for me is, spiritual health. It's like my spirit was sick. My spirit was fading, and my light was covered in all this mud. And my light thought that it was mud, and it forgot that it's light. And so for me, it's that distinction of I am not my thoughts, which is important, and I have a soul, and my soul needs to be nourished with light and love and faith and hope.
Other than psychedelics, another experiences that people often heard about is Burning Man. Jason, you've gone to Burning Man multiple times. Can you share a little more about was it also helpful in your spiritual growth as a human being?
For sure. Yeah, I've been to Burning Man 7 times. I think it's important that I disclaim this with Burning Man is one of those things that will never be understood unless you actually go to it. And so I can talk about it all day, and I love talking about it, but it's really important that people go experience it for themselves to really understand it. I think to use a metaphor or a concept that a lot of entrepreneurs will understand is Burning Man did a really good job of setting its cultural values up in a healthy way from the beginning. And as a result, the culture of Burning Man today is one that is extremely generous, extremely inclusive, extremely warm and kind. And for me, I experience the best of humanity often at Burning Man. I come back from Burning Man with my cup full because I'm reminded of what does it mean to be a more loving human to myself and to others. And there's nothing like it in the world. I've been to a lot of different festivals and I've had wonderful experiences, but there's nothing that compares to Burning Man. And it's because of the culture. Like the founders really got it right. They were able to create a culture that brings out the best in everyone. And it's crazy because it's bringing out the best of everyone in the most extreme environment. It's a desert. It's a brutal desert. So that reminds me that, this is all possible. It's all from within. You don't have to have a 5-star hotel to be your best. You just need a lot of the right environment, the right people.
Jason, in this conversation, we talk about love a lot and we talk about fear quite a lot as well. Would you like to talk a little bit about fear-based versus love-based leadership for founders?
Sure. Yeah, when I think about the last 13 years of building my company and as a leader, one lesson stands out to me above everything else, which is every decision that I made that was made out of fear, I've come to regret. And those decisions cost me and the business a lot, especially over the long term. And, love, I think, is often perceived as fluffy rainbows and peace signs. Some of the audience listening may wonder, what does love have to do with business, right? Business is so ruthless and business is so competitive. And why are we talking about love? Well, I'll give an example of how fear hurt my bottom line, hurt my ability to grow as a business. I think a lot of founders will empathize with the situation of having to manage someone who is not performing. And at some point, it's time to let this person go. And for me, I struggled to be decisive. I would often punt on the actual act of letting them go. I would make up all sorts of excuses. I would say, oh, yeah, this person is not going to like me if I let them go. Oh, they're going to take employees with them to their next place. They're going to join a competitor. They're going to try to sue the company, whatever it is. All sorts of reasons, some more valid than others, but they were all excuses at the end of the day as to why I shouldn't let this person go now. And really, at the end of it, was fear. Just, I was scared to let this person go. And I wasn't acting out of love. Because if I was acting out of love, if I really love this person, they deserve to be in an environment where they're set up for success, where they have a manager who believes in them. If I really loved my team deserves to have a leader in place that is the right leader for this next stage of growth. If I loved myself, I wouldn't put myself through all this extra stress and anxiety. And I would make the hard decision now and let this person go. All right. So I wasn't acting out of love. I was acting out of fear. And it cost everyone a lot. And no one won because of that. And so that's an example of where, had I been more loving, it would have been a better outcome for all of us.
Yeah, this is fascinating because speaking from personal experiences, I've also gone through similar fears in the past. And one notion for me to always talk myself out of this is I don't want to create sufferings for the other side. But it sounds like this is actually not the case here. The fact of the CEO firing another person, that gesture could be coming out of love as well.
Yeah, and it's not, I would actually even push back and say, I'm creating even more suffering for all the parties involved by not acting decisively. So we trick ourselves. I think this is where the mind is powerful, the ego is powerful. We can trick ourselves into saying, I don't want to hurt this other person. I don't want to create suffering for this other person. But then when I reflect on it, I actually created more suffering for this other person because, again, they deserve to be in an environment where they're set up for success. And time is our most precious asset. Time is all we have. And so every day that went by where I didn't act, I was wasting their very precious time. And that is the worst suffering. Yes, there was a short-term pain of being let go, of moving on. But that compared to the wasted time is nothing. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's about relative suffering. And I think love has this very powerful long-term quality to it. Fear often does not. Fear is a short-term thing. There are once in a while some situations where fear may be the right move, but in general, most of the time, I really regret not acting more in love.
Other than firing, are there any other instances where the founder and CEO can operate more out of love versus fear?
Yeah, especially in my board, I'm very lucky to have some incredibly smart, well-respected investors and board members. And I struggled with imposter syndrome for the longest time. I didn't feel like I was worthy of expressing my opinions and to also expressing my opinions in a really strong way. I look at all these other people around the table and they're so successful and I questioned myself. I said, what do I know? I'm this younger person that this is my first company. Like, what do I know? And that was a very fear-based approach to how I led in the boardroom. I can tell you now that I really regret that because there were certain things that we did that I did not have a good feeling about that have come back to bite us. Certain mistakes that we've made that have come back to bite us that I didn't speak up loudly enough on and could have been potentially prevented, right? And had I acted more out of love for myself and for my company and for my board, I would have spoken up.
How about the intention of actually building a startup? Because I observe that there are more founders these days who create companies for relatively ego-driven purposes. They want to become billionaires, rather they want to serve others, help others, making a dent in the universe. That sounds like a fear-based motivation to me as well.
Yeah, and the truth is, I think that that's okay. I love those founders too. And I myself was one of those founders. I started my company with a lot of ego and chip on my shoulder. And I don't have any regrets about that. It's more like maybe if these founders can just add 1% more love into their mix. It doesn't take away from their aspiration to be a billionaire. It just, balances things a bit more. One way or another, we all have to learn the lessons that we have to learn. So we all have the journey that we're on, and no two journeys are the same. No two journeys are comparable. The universe is going to continue to teach us what we need to learn.
Interesting. Let's say a love-based CEO versus a fear-based CEO. Would you bet which one would perform better than the others?
If I took a 30-year horizon, I would bet everything on the love-based CEO. But like I said, fear can be extremely, extremely powerful in the short term. And short term to me could even be as long as 10 years. So I'd have to look at a 30 to 50-year horizon at minimum. And we have so much to learn from nature, but just like love, how do I say this without sounding so woo-woo? It's like we know when we are feeling love, and we know intuitively that love is sustainable and that fear is not. And so how could we even exist today having this conversation if it wasn't love driving us for the past millions of years? It's not fear that got us here. It's love.
Yeah. If you had the chance to go back to the old Sift, now you are this new Jason who's full of love. Is there anything that you've done differently in terms of building organization?
Yeah, everything. I think I put myself through a lot of unnecessary stress, anxiety, and I was so attached to the outcome. I think there's a way to practice equanimity where I am at peace with what the outcome is. That doesn't mean that I'm not ambitious. I still aspire for excellence. It's just that recognizing there's a lot of things I don't control, and that winning and losing is actually not the point, for me at least. I think I was so obsessed with winning and losing. And I realize now that it's not about winning and losing. It's about learning and growing. And if I continue to learn and grow, I will win more often, more and more, right? The people who really win consistently over a long period of time, they are obsessed with learning and mastering their craft. And so I think I would approach things from a place of service and mastery rather than scarcity and zero-sum thinking. Like I said, there's just so many decisions that I made that really hurt myself and the company. I was being very reactive. I wasn't being very mindful about what I was doing and how I was behaving. And it's okay. I have no regrets because I believe that, again, we're all on this journey and we're supposed to learn what we're supposed to learn when we are supposed to learn it. So yeah, it's okay. But if I build another company, I'll be doing a lot of things different.
Did people back at Sift used to work very long hours as well? And for your new companies, would you change that part?
We did get a lot of praise for our work-life balance relative to a lot of other startups. So I am proud of that. I do think this paradigm could be evolved. I think that I was too obsessed with quantity over quality. And these days, I'm much more interested in quality. I want people to work from flow and not just because they have to or because there's pressure or social comparison and expectation. And, we apply first principles thinking. I'll just offer, we've all had days where we get more done in one day than we do a whole week. So why don't we optimize our workplaces to have that as a norm, right? And rest, really good rest is so important to performing well over long periods of time. You and I, we're no different from a professional athlete. And if you study any great professional athlete, you see how seriously they value rest. They really invest in rest and recovery. And right now, I think a lot of the startup hustle culture is the equivalent of playing an NBA basketball game every day for the whole year. It's like that level of pace. It's no surprise that we have burnout as a very common thing amongst founders. And so one thing I really coach my founders that I work with is to really let go of the guilt and the shame that we often feel when we take breaks, and to actually think of a break as a major investment in the business, a positive investment in the business. The other thing I offer is if we were to audit our calendar and evaluate how we've spent our time in the last 3-6 months, I guarantee that we could find at least 30% of activities that didn't really move the needle, didn't really matter actually. And so we could have just taken that 30% and not even put it on our calendar and just go do something else with our lives. So that means that we're not even spending our time well, right? We're wasting time. And so this is why I go back to it's about quality work, not quantity, right? I think Jeff Bezos said something really that stuck with me, which is every quarter, there's only a few decisions that really matter. And our job is to figure out what those decisions are and to focus on making those decisions extremely well.
Are you recommending us that we should abolish the 40-hour work week?
No, I'm not. I think it's not about the hours. I think it's more like there may be weeks where you need to work 40 hours because there's a massive deadline, and maybe it's necessary to like put in that extra time. Maybe there's weeks where you're feeling very inspired and you're doing some of the best work of your life, and you're just going through this very prolific creation. So it's more about mindfulness. It's like, where am I? Am I feeling depleted? Am I feeling in flow? And noticing and shifting between the two energies. Like getting more to the flow state as consistently as we can. So it's not about mandating X number of hours or abolishing it. It's more like, how do we create environments where everyone does the best work of their life every time they work consistently?
So if you were to have a chance to create another company, how would you design the work hours or the environment to optimize for flow?
I don't have that figured out, but I know one thing that I would push on is creating a culture. I mean, it's all about culture. I think the work hours and stuff is more like mechanical, and it's important, but if you don't figure out the culture, then the mechanics don't even matter. I want to create a culture where people are really honest. And it's like, hey, how are you really feeling? And I know that there were many days where I was at Sift and people would ask me that question and I would just pretend and I'd be like, yeah, I'm doing great. And I was not doing great. As I talked about with my depression, I was completely struggling. And I probably should have taken a real vacation. I should have probably taken a month off and just gone and worked on my mental health, my spiritual health, my physical health. But I didn't feel like I could. And that was all my own fault. These were all stories I was telling myself. I wanted other people's approval. I was worried about being judged as not committed, as a founder, as a CEO. I was being worried about being perceived as weak for taking time off. I was worried about what would happen to the business if I took time off. Ironically, I think I hurt the business a lot more by not taking time off because I couldn't be my very best self. I was not able to make great decisions, and that compounds and creates even more work downstream. So yeah, I would try to create a culture where we can really be more vulnerable. It's like, hey, yeah, I'm not actually feeling that good. I need some support. I need some help. I need to take a rest. I find that we're often not truly honest with ourselves and each other. And that's a problem. No one wins when you're not truly honest.
Jason, I noticed a super interesting tweet that you had earlier. Our frequency is life's most important metric, not our net worth, not days left to live, not our weight or anything else. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yeah, I think this is a little more of a woo-woo concept, but I really believe that we are all just vibrational waves. This is kind of a physics concept. Everything is vibrating and we're all operating at a frequency. And as we continue to raise our consciousness, as we continue to allow ourselves to experience more joy, more peace, but also the flip side of that, which is more sadness, more anger, all of it, all emotions. As we become more loving and more conscious beings, our frequency is raised. And so for me, at least, I really want to surround myself with people who are operating at high frequencies, who are mindful, and who are loving and able to be the bigger person in a situation, and people who are willing to be vulnerable and admit that they don't know it all, and that we're all working on ourselves and we're all continuing to evolve and learn and grow. And if I'm around lower frequency people, it's hard. It's really hard for me to not want to drop to that, right? And so just being more mindful of the kinds of people I look up to and that I surround myself with.
Higher frequency means being more love-based, and lower frequency means being more fear-based.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you look at the measurement of these different emotions, fear is a lower frequency than love.
Which is fascinating. Jason, I think we're almost running out of time, but before we leave, is there any interesting thing that you have a contrarian opinion about that would be fun to share? You mentioned something about capitalism.
Yeah, I don't know if it's contrarian, but I do think that I love capitalism. I'm so grateful for it. I also think that we're hitting a lot of the limitations of it. And I think there's probably an opportunity to evolve capitalism into something that has a bit more of a soul. is more conscious and mindful. I mean, I still want lots of economic opportunity and growth, but I think that when there's an obsession and focus on making things faster, cheaper, bigger, that comes at a cost, right? And we see what we're doing to the planet. We see how transactional things have become. It doesn't seem as loving as it could be. And so I wonder, what does a more loving form of capitalism look like? Can we still have an incredibly wide open ceiling for achievement, but also continue to raise the floor and help those who are in less fortunate positions? And can we be better neighbors to each other? And can we be better stewards of this planet? I think with the right genius, the right creativity, we don't have to trade profits and do-goodery.
And founders are actually in the prime position to be the positive change in the world. Founders also look up to heroes and role models. Are there any capitalists who are more soul-based than the others who might be great role models for founders to look up to?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is the founder of Patagonia. Yes. He seems to be, I haven't studied it in depth, but from what I know and understand, he seems incredibly values-driven. And he really wants to do right by the planet. And he has taken a lot of unusual, extraordinary measures to make sure that Patagonia is not bending to the will of others, but stays true to its own values. And that's a company that has been extremely successful financially too, but they don't compromise and they really want to take care of the planet. And so I'm inspired by that type of example, and I want to see how more of that can emerge.
So Jason, this is wonderful. Before we leave, are there any other topics that we have not had a chance to talk about?
I just have a message to those who are listening, which is you're not alone. Keep going. You got this. And just loving yourself is the best gift you can give to the world and to your business, to your team. And so keep on keeping on.
Okay. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing amazing wisdom. And thank you.
Okay. Take care.